Welcome back, friends. Hollywood has always romanticized the werewolf. They portray the transformation as a majestic, magical event fueled by the moon. But ancient European lore paints a much darker picture. Lycanthropy isn't magic, it is a blood-borne disease, and the transformation isn't majestic. It is a grotesque, agonizing process where the human skeleton breaks, stretches, and re-knits itself while the victim is fully awake. In the winter of 2014, two brothers, Marcus and Leo, traveled deep into the Bitterroot Mountains. Their estranged father had recently passed away, leaving behind nothing but an isolated hunting cabin. The brothers planned to clear out the property, sell it, and return to the city. But their father had kept a horrifying secret hidden beneath the floorboards. While exploring the damp basement, Leo discovered a secret room. It wasn't a wine cellar or a storage unit. It was a massive cage constructed from solid iron bars as thick as a man's wrist. Heavy steel chains lay discarded on the stone floor. But the most terrifying detail wasn't the cage itself. It was the deep, violent claw marks gouged into the solid iron, and the claw marks were on the inside. Resting on a table near the cage was their father's leather-bound journal. Marcus wiped the dust from the cover and began to read. The entries detailed a curse. An infection contracted from a wolf bite decades ago. Their father hadn't moved to the mountains for peace and quiet. He had exiled himself to protect the public. Every 28 days, he locked himself inside the iron cage to endure the agony of the change. But the final entry of the journal made the blood drain from Leo's face. The curse was tied to the bloodline. Upon the father's death, the infection would instantly pass to the eldest son. Leo slowly looked up from the journal and stared at his older brother, Marcus. Marcus was sweating profusely, shivering as he stared out the window at the rising full moon. In his panic, Leo stepped backward, his boot catching the edge of a glass kerosene lantern. It shattered across the floorboards. Leo winced, reaching down, only to slice the palm of his hand on a jagged piece of glass. Bright red blood welled up from the cut, dripping onto the floor. The sharp metallic smell of copper immediately filled the small cabin. The scent of the fresh blood was the catalyst. Marcus collapsed to his knees, letting out an agonizing guttural scream. The temperature of his body skyrocketed, his skin burning to the touch. Leo watched in absolute horror as he heard the sickening wet of his brother's spine forcibly elongating beneath his shirt. The disease had been triggered. "The cage!" Marcus screamed, his voice distorting into a wet, terrifying growl. "Put me in the cage, Leo. Do it now." Fighting his own terror, Leo grabbed his brother by the collar and dragged his convulsing body down the cellar steps. Marcus's hands were already warping, the fingernails splitting open as thick black claws began to violently push through the nail beds. Leo threw Marcus into the center of the iron cage and slammed the heavy barred door shut. His hands shook violently as he threaded the massive iron padlock through the latch and clicked it into place. He stumbled backward, pressing himself against the far wall of the basement, completely trapped as the transformation fully consumed his brother. What stood up inside the cage was not a wolf. It was a 9-foot-tall, emaciated monstrosity. Its skin was completely hairless, stretched tight over a massive, unnatural skeleton. The skull was a grotesque hybrid of man and beast, with glowing yellow eyes that held absolutely no trace of humanity. The beast locked its eyes on Leo's bleeding hand, and it smiled. The beast let out a deafening roar and threw its massive weight against the front of the cage. The impact shook the foundation of the cabin. Leo gasped. Their father's journal had mentioned that the damp mountain air had rusted the iron over the decades. The metal was compromised. As the beast slammed into the cage a second time, the thick iron bars shrieked and began to buckle outward. The cage was failing. Leo didn't wait for the third impact. He scrambled up the wooden cellar stairs, slipping on the dust in his panic. Just as he reached the top, he heard the deafening screech of metal tearing. The beast had ripped the iron door completely off its rusted hinges. It was loose. Leo slammed the heavy oak door at the top of the stairs and threw the deadbolt. He desperately pushed a massive wooden dresser in front of it to barricade the exit. Immediately, massive claws began tearing at the wood from the other side. The wood splintered as the beast tried to dig its way up into the living room, driven entirely by the scent of Leo's bleeding hand. Realizing the door wouldn't hold, Leo climbed the pull-down ladder into the tiny freezing attic. Pulling the hatch up behind him, he huddled in the dark, clutching an unloaded hunting rifle he found in the corner. For 6 agonizing hours, he listened to the monster below him completely destroy the cabin, smashing furniture, tearing up floorboards, and howling a blood-curdling cry that echoed across the mountains. And then the pale light of dawn crept through the attic window. The violent thrashing below stopped immediately, replaced by the sound of a man weeping. Leo slowly opened the attic hatch and climbed down. The cabin was utterly destroyed. Sitting in the middle of the wreckage, shivering and covered in dirt, was Marcus. He was entirely human again. Marcus had survived the first transition. They could go home. They could pretend it was a nightmare. But as Leo wrapped a blanket around his brother's shivering shoulders, Marcus looked up at him with haunted eyes. "I remember it," Marcus whispered, staring at the bandage on Leo's hand. "I remember exactly how you smelled." Leo knew right then. The nightmare wasn't over. It had just begun.